Sonya Halpern, representing District
This meeting
39.
is being recorded.
And I am entering into my second term. So this is year 3 for me. And as Representative Evans can attest, we both have just gotten right to work. It's the start of the session. In some ways, this session has moved kind of slowly. We've got so much leadership change in both chambers, from the Speaker of the House and the new President of the Senate, who's our Lieutenant Governor, new leadership within the Majority Caucus. I happen to be a new member of leadership in the Minority Caucus in the Senate. I'm now a vice chair of the Senate Democratic Caucus. Lots of new chair people in the Senate, and musical chairs, because at the start of every new biennium, we also get to move offices. So I literally an hour and a half ago, got moved into my new office. So between that and then just session days and committee times, it's been really hectic. What I will say is that one of the things that we did at the very top of the session on day 1 is we voted on our adjournment calendar. So we can tell you today, which is unusual, that we will sine die on March 29th. We can also share today, which is unusual, that we actually know what days we're going to be in session at the Capitol and the chamber between now and then. And for the most part, that's Monday through Thursday. I think we've got one Friday, March 3rd, that we will be at the Capitol. Other than that, we will be there every Monday through Thursday. And I just want to say, come down and visit us. This is the people's house. And when we are in session and it is busy and we've got our committee meetings and you can easily find us at the Capitol, please come. So that's just a welcome remark and a real urge for you to come visit us while we're down there too, because we do love to see constituents. We love to be able to get to hear what's on your mind as you advocate for the things that you care the most deeply about. So that's a little intro from me. We've got, I think, a pretty full agenda of things that we can share with you tonight. And then, of course, I'll do a little plug, although Kennedy may do this behind me. We always love to get your questions too. So we're going to make sure that we build in time for you to ask us questions. And we will be very happy to answer those. And if we don't know the answers offhand, we will be sure to circle back around and get you all the answers to the questions that you care about. So I'm going to maybe toss it back to you, Representative Evans, and we can start talking about issues and budget and what we've been working on.
Sounds great. Thank you. And yes, please let us know your questions. We want to leave time for that. And really quickly, I want to reintroduce y'all to Kennedy McClung. She's my chief of staff, returning with me again. And a lot of you will recognize her from neighborhood meetings. And also I want to introduce you to Christopher Collins, who's also online tonight. He is a intern in the office this session. He's getting his PhD from the greatest university on the land, the University of Georgia, back-to-back national championship Georgia Bulldogs. And I'm so excited to have him in my office. He's really hit the ground running. And of course, you'll always be able to reach me if you need me. I'm always happy to talk to you, but you can also reach out to them. And sometimes they can be a little bit faster than me, but we're here to serve. So starting off on the issues, something that done together since the beginning, and even in the off season, trying to figure out ways to make our communities safer, and make sure that we keep public safety in the city of Atlanta top of mind. And y'all will recall that last year we introduced legislation to attempt to allow the city of Atlanta to use noise detection devices to try to catch the street racers and those that had altered their mufflers that's interrupting your nighttime slumber and your kids' naps in the middle of the day and all of those things. We had introduced that toward the end of last year's session and got a hearing and got it passed out of committee, but couldn't get it all the way across the study committee to look at doing that here in our state. And so we're reintroducing that legislation in both the House and the Senate to attempt another study committee, but also we're going to take a run at just full implementation and just see if we can go ahead and get this idea done. But we got the plan A and we got the plan B. Another thing that we talked about was front facing license plates. I believe there are 28 to 30 other states that have the requirement to have the dual license plates, one in the back, which we have, but also one in the front, which can be a great public safety aid because it's a lot easier to pick up the tag in the front if you've got cameras out on the streets, or you got a lot out on the street, and then you have obviously you have cameras in some locations on our streets, on our highways. So this is way more complicated than I ever could have imagined. I mean, it seems pretty simple to me. Can't we just slap another tag on the car? But it's very complicated because a lot of cars aren't already fitted for that. So we have to work with the manufacturers to make sure that we've got a place on the front, or come up with some alternative way for them to be there. There's also some information that I've recently learned where it can sometimes have a negative effect on sensors in the front, the safety devices that some cars have, and also it can have some effect on electronic vehicles, and it can sort of drain them faster. Now, having said all that, these are obviously issues that other states have worked through. I'm willing to work through them here because I do think this would be an amazing tool for public safety. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who has seen footage on the news of a car racing through an intersection or plowing into something, and you can see the front of the car, but you can't see the back. And so if only we had that tag in the front, we might have been able to catch someone faster and bring some justice for victims, and also obviously also perhaps deter folks from doing those things in the first place because it's easier to catch them. But it is not as simple as I would have hoped. So I do think if we get this done, it'll have to be through a study committee. That has been introduced in the House, and we'll keep you posted on it. And we're not giving up, I think, is the bottom line, right, Senator Halpern?
Yes, we're not. It's not yet introduced. None of these are yet introduced in the Senate. That is coming up. I do want to share, though, that for those who've been tracking the Buckhead City movement, that is something that I do expect to come back up in the Senate this session. I've heard rumor as to who will be the sponsor, the author of the bill, but pretty consistently, I am hearing that it is going to get some move. I don't know how far it will move, but I am hearing consistently that there will be a reintroduction of the Buckhead City bill. So I did want to share that. It's way too early for me to say what committee it might be assigned to, or what the goal is. What I can say is that pretty consistently, I am hearing from both Republicans and Democrats, quite honestly, that Mayor Dickens is doing a good job, that he is definitely creating the kinds of relationships under the Gold Dome that are important. We continue to do that as well between those of us in the Georgia General Assembly and those with Atlanta City Council. We have kept, our doors open to each other and lines of communication open, and we really are locked hand in hand in terms of making sure that we're on top of what the issues are and trying to address them, as you've just heard, even with the legislation that Representative Evans just mentioned, constantly trying to figure out how we can make sure that public safety is to all of us, and that we continue to push for legislation that can make it obvious. So a little early to talk about Buckhead City Bill, except to say, do not be surprised if it returns again this year. And we will, as the Atlanta delegation, excuse me, we will certainly stand up, speak out. I'm going to toss back to you, and I'll be right back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. We will stay vigilant, and what I'm hoping, and it is too early to make predictions on City of Buckhead, but I'm hoping that this is just a way to let them continue to get it out of their system and talk about it. But hopefully, it won't pass, but we've got to stay vigilant and take it seriously. And so that's another reason why Senator Halpern and I have tried deliberately, not only because it's important, our public safety is important, but also because the more we do to show our commitment to improving public safety in the city, the less fodder that those for the City of Buckhead movement have. So I'm going to move to a little bit of education news. And for those of you that subscribe to the newsletter, which is probably most on this call, but perhaps not all, but those of you that get my newsletter know, because I've been screaming very excitedly about it, that as part of the governor's budget recommendations that I expect to be adopted for the first time in 11 years, the Hope Scholarship and the Hope Grant will equal full tuition at our public colleges and universities and technical colleges across our state. This is a huge game changer for students, particularly those who have financial need and did not have a 1200 SAT score, which is what you had to have for the last 11 years to be guaranteed full tuition under the Hope program. So this is huge. A lot of y'all know it's very personal to me because I was a Hope Scholar and really know that I would not have been able to go to college without that full tuition. And so I'm just thrilled that students are going to have that again. It's not a permanent fix because it's not yet in code. This was something that was done through the budget. I'm happy that it was done through the budget, but I will not be giving up trying to make sure that we ultimately codify this so that we can guarantee this for students for years to come. But I will say, I feel pretty good that it would be really hard for any governor not to keep the Hope Grant and scholarship at full tuition going forward, because the lottery is doing better. It's doing better and better every year. The lottery for education reserve funds continue to pile up. So there's just money available. It's almost $2 billion that we have in extra lottery for education dollars. So there really is no reason not to be returning the promise of hope to our students. So I'm very, very excited about that. One negative, and let me preface, I'm going to talk about a negative bill in the House really quickly that's coming up in the education arena. But before I do that, I want to say we're starting out really slow. Now, we always start out slow the first year of a 2-year biennial, but this year I feel like is particularly slow, even in the amount of legislation that's been dropped so far. We have a new speaker. There's a new leader in the Senate in Lieutenant Governor Jones. So that may have a lot to do with it, but legislators themselves seem to be a little slow in introducing legislation. So we'll see if that picks up. But there was a piece of legislation dropped, I believe last week, to increase the amount of money available for those who get the scholarships that are tax credit scholarships that are used to pay for tuition at private schools. And that has been capped. And I forget the number. If someone, Senator Halpern, if you know, I think it's capped right now, and they want to raise it by, I think, another 200 million.
So it's capped right now at 120 million, which we raised, I think, even just last session, up from 100 million or so. But the attempt to continue to raise the number of tax credits available, it seems to be coming with much regularity, and it looks like now the hope is to raise that to $200 million.
Right. So that's a negative thing that got, I think, I'm very excited that the governor's budget proposal will fully fund the education funding formula for our K through 12 schools. And so now is not the time to be taking money out. We need to keep fully funding our schools. We need that will require more money. So we need to keep that money in our public schools. One other thing on the education front I'll share, and then the senator may have some more bills to talk about. But a bipartisan bill led by Republicans to allow in-state tuition for DACA students was dropped this week. It's been dropped before. The lead sponsor is State Representative Casey Carpenter from Dalton, up in Northwest Georgia, my original hometown. So I can't say for sure it's going to pass just because it has Republican sponsors, because it's been introduced before, but there does seem to be some momentum about it. So I'm going to be cautiously optimistic that we can bring some help to these families. And also, this is good for Georgia, because we need more workers, we need more highly educated workers, and this accomplishes all of those things.
On the Senate, here's something that has been really promising. One of the priorities is outlined by the majority caucus has been around an issue of literacy. And as you may know, Georgia really has fairly low rates of children who are reading at grade level by the third grade and also by the fifth grade. The third grade number is a really important number because, as you might have heard in the past, if you are not reading at third grade level at third grade, you are 4 times more likely to actually drop out of high school. And the prison pipeline and the anticipation of how many beds are going to be needed in the prison is based off of third grade. So the majority caucus has actually outlined literacy as a priority this session. And what is very unusual, I sit on the Education and Youth Committee. We have now had 4 hours of hearings as a joint committee, Education and Youth and Higher Ed. So we've had 4 hours of meetings in the last 2 days. Next week, we actually 4.5. Next week, we will have another 4.5 hours of joint meetings. And then again, the following week on the issue of literacy. I am especially excited because I think and hope that we will actually be able to determine some actual legislation and policy that we can institute around this issue. And this is not simply an appropriations problem. I think that there's a lot that we can do that isn't necessarily about the money. One of the things that we've been talking about, for example, is the fact that here in Georgia, you don't have to enter school until you're 6. And there are 10% of our children who do not go to school in kindergarten. They skip kindergarten because typically you're 5 in kindergarten and they will enter in first grade. So there's some talk about lowering the age by which people would have to be in school. And then on the other end, by the way, here in Georgia, you can leave school without parental consent because you can decide this for yourself at 16. So we have over time also looked at kind of the raise the age policy and try to study that. We've had actual study committees in the Senate around that. There are different issues. So again, to Representative Evans' point, some of this stuff that may seem really straightforward ends up being complicated. If you've got a 16-year-old who does not want to be at school, are you going to force them to stay? Or what pathway might we be able to create for them if we are going to say, no, you have to remain in school till you're 17, if not 18? So we're looking at some things like that. We had an incredible hearing today where we heard from, and I just want to give a shout out since we're on this call to Fulton County. We heard from the Fulton County superintendent, and just so you know, they are doing incredible work specifically around literacy. And they have over the last, well, since 2021, they are investing, $100 million towards making sure that every single child, K through second grade, is able to read. They are building up an infrastructure to be able to support that. And so all of us on the education, I knew this just because I'm in Fulton County, but so many of my other colleagues who got the chance to hear for the first time about the great work that Dr. Looney and team and the Fulton County board will be very impressed with that work. So we are really focused on literacy. I'm excited about that. And we'll see where it leads. But I am very hopeful that if nothing else, I will determine a piece of legislation that could come out of this, that hopefully we can navigate through the committee to the floor and get it on over to the House to support more of our children being able to read at third grade level. Right now, that number is, well, we've heard some competing numbers, but let's just say 36% of our third graders in Georgia are able to read at grade level. We all agree that that's far too low. So that's a principal focus currently in the Education Committee. And we have not had a lot of bills. I will just say, we are also very slow. Top of the biennial, we have not had many bills to be dropped yet. So I'm constantly keeping my eye out. Today, literally, was the first day that we voted on a bill on the floor. And I'll talk about that bill when we get to a different topic area. But that's kind of what's happening from my standpoint in education.
Great. Well, we'll talk a little bit about healthcare if that's okay. In the House, Democrats have introduced a bill to expand Medicaid. Unfortunately, I can't bring you news to tell you that I'm very optimistic about the chances of that bill, especially because the new speaker, Speaker Burns, announced in a press conference during the first week of session that that was not something that we were going to be taking up this session. That's very disappointing for a lot of reasons. One, because that's good policy that would be helping Georgians. It would ensure about 400,000 Georgians, and it's our money that we could get back from the federal government. So all that is disappointing, but also because I had really started to hear a lot of rumors after Kemp was reelected that this was something that he was ready to move on in his second term. And so I'm disappointed that that's not going to happen this year. It doesn't mean that it can't happen in the other years. And it doesn't mean that we should not continue to fight and push this year, which we'll do. But I know a lot on this call are very interested in Georgia doing the right thing and expanding Medicaid. So I just wanted to be very honest with you about where we are on that. One piece of good healthcare related news indirectly is that now House member Michelle Au, I was about to call her senator because she was over with Senator Halpern, and now we're very fortunate to have her in the House. But she is sponsoring a piece of legislation to put Georgia within the national average for our tobacco tax. And she has gotten some very good Republican co-sponsors for that bill. So I see that potentially moving, and that's obviously good for one, it's good for revenue. And number two, it's good because it makes smoking more expensive and hopefully less accessible to many, particularly young people. And we don't, as many people as we can get not to be smoking, the better off that we're all going to be money-wise and health-wise. So that's good news. That's there's other things that are going on, but I would say those are some of the highlights over in the House on the healthcare side.
In the Senate, on the healthcare side, we have only had a couple of meetings, but I will focus on one, which was a joint meeting with a new committee, which is the Children and Families Committee. So that is a brand new committee in the Senate. Senator Kay Kirkpatrick is the chair of that committee. We did a joint meeting, hours long, around an issue that we heard about when we were in our budget appropriations meetings, and learned that we have children, foster care children in particular, who are being put up in hotels. So you might have read even some articles around the hoteling of foster children. So we had a joint committee meeting where we really delved into that issue, and we will continue to do that. So that was a starting point, but really it's forcing us to look at some of the hardest cases of young people who are not with their birth families and are unable to be placed with foster parents for a number of different reasons. And we got to find a solution for it. So I will say that in a bipartisan manner, we agreed to find a solution. And it may be that we need to build more facilities. I mean, it may be that we need to better understand who's utilizing the beds that exist in facilities around the state. It may be that we need early intervention. Many of these children have behavioral issues and are severely autistic. And so there's a number of different threads that we heard in that first hearing, and we'll have to pull on them and unravel them deeper to figure out where we want to go. But that's going to be a focus. We are going to have a solution that is a appropriation and or legislative solution, to at least start to get at what needs to happen in a better way for these young people. I don't know that we're going to solve it, so I will tell you that, but foster children has been on our agenda, again, in a bipartisan way. Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan specifically, really, that was a big focus of his, and there's others in the chamber who agree with that work. And so we'll continue to build on the things that we've already done for them. But right now, we're focused on the most difficult, hardest issues. And some of the issue has to do with provider reimbursements. And so, I'll jump back and link this back to the conversation around Medicaid expansion. But a lot of what we know that we need to consider is around reimbursed rates. And Medicaid expansion is something that we in the Senate Democratic caucus have also introduced a bill around. We will be talking about that a lot. That is one of our priority issues this session as well. What next?
Yeah, where would you like to head?
Shall we talk? Can I go back to public safety for a moment? We kind of started to touch on that a bit when we were talking about Buckhead, and then I had a whole coughing fit. I want you to know that we will be seeing, well, we're already hearing the language around, we want to be tougher on crime. What that's already starting to look like in terms of some of the bills that have been introduced is more mandatory sentencing, which is something that through the years we've moved away from. But harsher on crime these days seems to be shortcut for mandatory terms and harsher punishment. So we'll see what happens there. We do have a bill that I have sponsored along with the author on street racing, and it does have harsher penalties. I will share a story with you. I actually did a ride along with the Georgia State Patrol on a Saturday night, 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. And one of the things that even while I was with them happened is that there were 500 street racers in Cobb County, 500. And so street racing is really, it's still a nuisance. It is still happening. It is happening consistently still. And so this bill would go a little bit further than we went with the bill last year with the governor, and have harsher penalties when you intentionally watch street racing, when you are intentionally, here I go again, pulling together that kind of activity, because it's dangerous. It's a nuisance to everybody. All of us hear all the time about how the noisy mufflers, the street racing, it's just dangerous. So we do want to address that. And that will have bipartisan support. It already does have bipartisan support, but I think that that's something that will in fact cross over to the House.
Yeah,
we're done.
That's great. I know it will have a lot of support in the House as well. I'll touch on also on the issue of safety, because I think it's hard to talk about public safety without talking about guns, which is something that our governor seems to forget sometimes, and appreciate a lot of the good things he's doing. But this is one area where I just feel like he's missing the boat completely, and it's killing people. There have been 4 common sense gun safety bills dropped in the House, and I'll be adding my name as a co-sponsor to all of these. This was also a question in the chat about what gun sense legislation is out there this year. So House Bill 161, a bill to encourage gun owners to do what I think responsible gun owners think is obvious, which is lock up your guns. And if you leave your gun somewhere where a kid can have access to it and they're hurt, then it makes that a crime. That's what House Bill 161 does, because we've got to deter these accidents that are happening with children when you leave guns out. We wouldn't stand for folks leaving butcher knives sitting on the corners of counters where kids can grab them, and guns obviously are even more fatal. So we need to encourage that. House Bill 135 makes a gun owner responsible if their gun is used by a minor in the commission of a crime or threats of violence. This is another one to encourage responsible gun ownership. Lock it up, make sure that little hands can't get access to it. And it also would be a great way to encourage gun owners to talk to their children about responsible gun use and how this gun is mine and I have this and I have the training, but you don't, and you don't get to use this until you become that responsible gun owner. House Bill 44 would require background checks for private sales of guns, which currently doesn't happen. And then House Bill 45, which would require a 3-day waiting period after the purchase of a gun to have access to that gun to prevent folks committing crimes of passion, running out, grabbing a gun, and then running, which we know was what happened in the tragic shooting that happened in March of last year, just down the road from us here in Morningside, when there were the shootings at the spas on Piedmont. So those 4 bills are introduced, primary sponsor Michelle Au, along with many in the House, and like I said, myself included. And I know that there are many supporters of those pieces of legislation in the Senate as well.
There are, as a matter of fact, I am co-sponsoring a bill similar to the one that you mentioned with safe storage, locking up your guns and storing them properly. That has not yet dropped, but it will be any day now, so you can be on the lookout for that. Some of the other pieces of legislation that we have not yet dropped, but that's coming, would be one that creates and funds gun violence prevention programs in partnering cities, pieces of legislation to help fight gang violence in Georgia prisons by increasing the number of correctional officers who are also correctional officers and mental health workers, and other common sense gun reform requiring universal background checks for all gun purchases, banning stalkers and domestic violence abusers from possessing guns. So you can be on the lookout for those bills. I don't yet have bill numbers for those, but those are coming and they're part of the Democratic priority list. And I am working on myself a bill that would create parameters around no-knock warrants and really have more oversight that's built into the process for no-knock warrants. So that's coming, and that is something that I hope to be able to do with the approval of our sheriffs and our police chiefs, because it does not get passed if they are against that. So working together with them to really make sure that we come up with something that actually makes it much safer for civilians and also for our law enforcement officers, to be honest. There is a need to standardize practices across every law enforcement agency in the state. And we don't have nearly enough of our agencies that are state agency certified. And so that's something that I'm going to push for again. At the end of last session, I actually did a resolution urging every law enforcement agency in the state to become state accredited or state certified through organizations like the Sheriff's Association or the police chiefs, because they are on top of what the emerging trends and the evolution in policing looks like. And so it would be great to have more of our agencies actually go through their program, and it would give us more consistency. So you'll hear me talk a lot about that, trying to get our law enforcement agencies to certify. But in the meantime, I'll focus on no-knock warrants kind of separately as well.
That's great. And I hope we see that crossover, which y'all go ahead and mark your calendar. Crossover day is going to be March 6th. So that will be the last day that a bill has to pass either the House or the Senate to stay alive. And then, of course, we'll also have a post crossover day town hall. So look out for that. It'll be sometime after March 6th. A couple of general government things that are floating around in the House. I'll start with, well, all of these are kind of bad. I was going to say I'll start with the bad news first. House Bill 136 was dropped either the end of last week or beginning of this week, which would it seems innocuous in some ways. It's simply a reporting bill. It's asking the Commissioner of Corrections to report on certain information of those that are inmates in our jails. But what the bill asks for specifically is immigration status, offenses, and home countries of persons who are confined in the Department of Corrections. And I don't need to tell anybody on this call how hate is festering out in our streets. And I think this is a hateful bill that I think will only stir up more hatred and negative feelings among folks that are other, that don't look like us. And I don't see this being a positive thing for our state. So I hope this one doesn't move. I haven't heard much about it. It did make the news, but I haven't heard a lot of discussion about it among other reps. So hopefully that's not something that folks are super excited about. One thing that just dropped today is House Bill 128, and it also very innocuously attempts to change the definition of what is a qualified minority business. And Georgia's already not great when it comes to minority contracting. The federal government is way ahead of us on ensuring opportunities for minority-owned businesses. Georgia's not done a great job of that. But this bill, House Bill 138, will make the definition of a qualified minority business one that is owned by someone who is of a race that is makes up less than 50% of Georgia's population. And it's estimated that as soon as this year, Caucasian individuals may be less than 50%. So we could end up with a definition that makes Caucasian citizens qualify as minority business owners, which certainly is not what those laws are meant to do. They're meant to provide opportunity for those that might not have otherwise been able to do, that didn't have companies handed down through generations of folks. So I think this is a negative direction for our state. And then the last sort of general government thing I'll touch on is there's a bill that is seeking to make district attorney and solicitor elections across our state nonpartisan. Right now, if you run for district attorney, if you run for solicitor, you run as a Democrat or Republican. Now, I will tell you very honestly, I have mixed feelings about this. I think the intent of this bill is to attack and try to remove a lot of Democratic district attorneys who have been elected in counties that traditionally elected Republicans. But I don't think the role of district attorney should be partisan. So I don't like the intent of this bill, but I do think it's better when district attorneys, just like judges, I believe should always be elected nonpartisan. So I'm going to have to think really long and hard about this, and I want to hear from you and your feelings on this, and I'll be watching very closely to make sure before I cast my vote on this one. But I do think that one will come up for a vote.
Few things on the Senate, not as much in the kind of government oversight category, but just generally, I do want you to know there's some, I have one constituent in particular who every week of session asks me, what about online sports betting? So I do want to just say that we do have a bill. It is SB 57. It just dropped in the Senate. And I am actually one of the sponsors of the bill. And it would provide for the regulation and the taxation of online sports betting. There is also more talk about racing as well. We'll see what happens with these bills. As you might recall, any expansion of gaming beyond the lottery in our state has had a hard time getting through the General Assembly for a number of reasons. Another go at it this year, and we'll see what happens. Certainly from my standpoint, people are already doing online sports betting. We are missing out opportunities to actually make money for the state and to provide back to the services that are needed for the people of this state by not moving into online sports betting, horse racing, casino gaming. I mean, there's lots of reasons why people don't like these kinds of activities. But much in the same way that I believe that other states have figured it out, I think we can figure it out. We can figure out how to use the money. We can figure out how to make sure that we're not encouraging people to get addicted to gambling and gaming. But it is a huge opportunity. It represents a lot of money for the state. So it's worth looking at again. So the ball is rolling in the Senate, and we'll see what happens. I will say last session, the ball got rolling in the Senate and it passed the Senate and it got stuck in the House. So I don't know. Representative Evans might have a better sense of what might happen when it gets back to the House this time. But I think that there is some appetite for us to be able to realize that revenue and be able to use it to reinvest back into our citizens.
I agree. It's a sports betting is an idea whose time has come. I believe it's already here. As Senator Halpern said, our citizens are already participating in online sports betting, and we're just not getting the revenue for that. Our sports teams have been asking for this for a while because it's a fan engagement tool for them. I anticipate that we will also introduce a sports betting bill in the House, and I expect to be a co-sponsor of that bill when it happens. My only skin in this game is that the money goes to educational purposes, and particularly to needs-based aid. So that's what I'll be looking out for in the House. I think sports betting could very well pass in the House. I don't think any other type of gaming I don't think we'll be able to get any other kind of gaming across the finish line in the House. And that was the problem last year. We tried to do everything all in one bill and just didn't have the votes to do it. I do think the votes are there for sports betting. So I hope that we can stay focused. There's a lot of interest around the halls in this bill. And sometimes that leads to problems for bills when you have too many folks that want it right now, right here, right now, and don't want to wait and let us do it, take little baby steps here with sports betting first, and then perhaps follow up with horse racing in casinos. Speaking of revenue, we have got a lot of it right now in the state of Georgia. If y'all been keeping up with the newsletters, you saw that it has a $6.6 billion surplus that we're looking at for the 2024 fiscal year. There's concern from the governor and our state economists that those numbers won't hold. They won't continue to regurgitate themselves year after year. So there's some hesitancy to spend all of that surplus. I can understand that in some ways, but keep in mind, we do have a rainy day fund for the state, and that already sits at $4 billion, which is what is considered to be healthy for our state budget to have in reserve funds. So we're talking about $6.6 billion on top of that. Right now, the governor's proposed budget proposes to spend about half of that, $1 billion on a tax refund to citizens, to taxpayers, and then also $1 billion to help with property tax relief. I know there are a lot of folks that have ideas and ways to spend the other $3 billion. So we'll see. I think you can expect to see some of it spent, and we should. I mean, we should invest in our people. I understand the concern about not wanting to put funds in that will be required to be spent year after year when you don't know that the revenue would be there. That's not responsible. If you get a bonus, you don't go out and get something that's gonna require you to pay payments year after year when you don't know that's coming in. But if we make smart investments in healthcare, in early childhood, in our infrastructure, those are things that save us money down the line. So I think that there's a very responsible way to spend some of this money, and I hope that we see that. Myself, along with the new whip of the Democratic caucus, State Representative Sam Park, and others, we're pushing an earned income tax credit increase for working families. Not everyone benefits very much from a tax refund because not everyone pays taxes, but earned income really workers, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to get some movement on that. If we're gonna help the best of these, or those with the most, then we need to help those that are earning less and are really struggling out there.
And the good news is in the Senate, that's also one of our initiatives. So there's a lot of symbiotic relationship from Democrats anyway on bills that are going to be introduced and messages that we're going to all be giving. during this session. So if nothing else, we will really highlight the issues and message around them, and allow people to more broadly understand our perspective on why we want to have happen the things that we're saying would be good governance. Um, I see there is a question about reproductive rights and voting rights, and so we'll talk deeper about the reproductive rights part, because there is big efforts already happening in both the House and the Senate in that regard. I will just say on voting rights, the Secretary of State had said that he would like to see us either change the threshold for runoffs or move to ranked choice voting or instant runoffs. And I have heard very little of that discussion in the Senate hall. So I don't know where people sit on that, or if we're going to actually see a piece of legislation. But I will tell you that I am getting signatures now for a piece of legislation that I've authored that would automatically trigger the mailing of an absentee ballot if you requested it in the primary or the general. So, and a runoff occurs. So, in a runoff, you would automatically be mailed your absentee ballot if you had requested it in the primary or the general. One of the things that definitely has happened with the shortening of some of the runoff periods is that in November, we didn't have enough opportunity for people to request and then receive absentee ballots for that runoff. And so I want to shorten or to shorten the opportunities for that to happen again by at least saying, if you requested it, you should just automatically get it for the runoff if a race moves into a runoff. So I will be introducing that. I will have a lot of support from my Democratic colleagues. I don't know that I'll have support from my Republican colleagues, but I think that it will at least trigger us to really start talking more vocally about runoffs, which we have not done in these first couple of weeks of session.
Yeah, on the House side, I'm a co-sponsor. It's a bipartisan bill, was dropped just today, so it doesn't have a number yet, but it is a bill that would allow municipalities, local governments, counties, cities to use the ranked choice voting system if they would like to. So it's not required, but if a local government wants to use ranked choice voting, they can. And it's a cost savings thing. These runoffs are very expensive. They're expensive. The statewide ones are expensive too, of course. But for a small city or county, this is a big budget item for them. And so this will allow them to save that money on the runoffs by doing the ranked choice voting system, which we already allow for military ballots. That was passed a couple of years ago. I also think, and I'm a big fan of ranked choice voting. I've been a fan for a while. There's a little side note. This is Jeopardy trivia information for you, but Maine, was one of the first states, if not the first state, to implement ranked choice voting. And it's a young man, a UGA graduate from Young Harris, Georgia, named Kyle Bailey, that moved up to Maine, and he was very instrumental in getting that passed up in Maine. And they had a congressional race under that system that another Georgian worked on, John Buckner, that some of y'all may know, Debbie Buckner. It's her son, State Representative Debbie Buckner. But anyway, there's a lot of Georgia connections to ranked choice voting. So because of my relationships with them, I've been exposed to it for a long time and have been a fan. So I'm excited to support this for the money savings. But also, I think if local governments implement it and people see it on this smaller scale, they'll get more comfortable with it. And perhaps more folks would be willing to implement it at the state level, which I was so excited to see the Secretary of State support, but it doesn't seem like Republican leadership in the House or the Senate are as excited about it, and the governor as well. So I think this municipal step is something that we can get done this year, and perhaps will make us all more comfortable and familiar with ranked choice voting. Those are the so far in the House. I'm sure there will be more things to come. I know State Representative Roger Bruce plans to introduce again his bill that would allow for county-wide voting. So no matter where you live in Fulton, on election day, you can go vote at a precinct in Fulton. We know that it's not the olden days where you have to find somebody's name in a voter roll book. So you should be able to go anywhere in the county. We do that during early voting. This would allow that to happen on election day as well. And I'll be co-sponsoring that alongside Representative Bruce again. But I haven't yet heard, knock on wood, cross your fingers, all the things. Haven't seen negative voting bills yet. So I hope that stays that way. Senator Halpern, did you want to talk some more about reproductive freedom? We've got some things in the House, but tell us what's going on in the Senate.
So, well, I think actually in the Senate and the House came together, I believe, just last week. I know we had a big, huge press conference last week on the Reproductive Freedom Act. And so this is an attempt to codify contraception, access to reproductive health care. That would include abortion, that would include contraception, and it is an effort to unravel effectively, to unravel the existing abortion ban that we currently have in state law, that I know is still being challenged in the court, but effectively that is in practice today in law. That's really the short, that's the top line on it. It really is to codify health care, women's reproductive health care in the fullest spectrum that you can think of it.
Yep, and we introduced similar legislation in the House, probably on the same day. As many on this call know, we just recently passed what would have been the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade had that not been overturned, and that was a sad day for us to commemorate in the House, the loss of that freedom for women, and thinking about our daughters and granddaughters having fewer rights than we had. So I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of the Reproductive Freedom Act in the House, and obviously that's not something that the Republican majority is excited about. But I'm hopeful that this the court case will go well for us. I mean, you never know what judges are going to do, but for those that aren't aware, there was a challenge to, well, there's litigation going on about the 15-week bill, and it led to this, I mean, the 6-week bill, and it led to this conversation about Georgia has a constitutional right to privacy. And you know, the federal case talked about how Roe v. Wade was premised on a federal constitutional right to privacy that some of the justices decided didn't exist. But here in Georgia, our Constitution, we do have it spelled out, constitutional right to privacy. And so there was a challenge to not allowing abortion in Georgia because we do have this constitutional right to privacy. And so that's going to play out in the courts, and we'll see what happens with that. But that all stemmed out of the litigation relating to the 6 weeks bill. So we'll be following that. But as far as legislation to codify our rights to abortion here in the state of Georgia, we will keep up the fight because we have no choice but to keep up the fight. But I'm not sure that will cross the finish line. I don't think, though, that we will see any legislation to try to further restrict abortion in Georgia, to outlaw it altogether. I mean, right now, the 6-week bill seems to be and that's too far, but that seems to be as far as our Republican leadership is willing to go. And Speaker Burns said as much during the press conference that his pre-session press conference that he's not intending to focus on any other legislation related to abortion rights until we see what happens in the court. So at least for this year, though people may introduce bills, remember, people can introduce anything. And I will warn you, you're going to read in the newspaper about every crazy fringe bill that gets introduced in the House or the Senate, just because we should always be vigilant. But the newspaper sometimes likes to make, no offense to my friends at the AGC, but they may try to make it sound like this thing is about to go on the governor's desk. And there are rogue senators who introduce things that have no chance of getting passed. So be vigilant, but also don't get too upset about every single crazy thing that you read about in the newspaper, because it could just be one man or one woman's crazy idea that no one else believes in. So take some comfort. And you can ask us. You can ask me, ask Senator Halpern, and we'll tell you if it's somebody that you should be concerned about.
Sure. What I think we had wanted to also just talk about equity a bit. Um, One of the things that we've talked about in the Senate is um, this is going to go back a little bit to voting, but ending partisan gerrymandering. So we do have a bill that would create an independent commission for um, reapportionment, um, codifying the right. So they're repealing the constitutional amendment that prohibits gay marriage, codifying the right to interracial marriage, anything that you can think of that's civil rights kind of related, and making sure that it's codified. Because one of the things that is a fear is that slowly by slowly, we're chipping away at other laws that could then turn around and impact current practice in these areas. So we want to codify it so it's not left up to chance. In the same way that I think Roe v. Wade was not codified, but we thought, well, this is the general practice, this is not going to go away. We want to be proactive and codify some of the things that we find to be important. So we will have bills as the Senate Democratic Caucus in this vein. So you can be out on the lookout for that. I will say, I feel like I keep saying we will have bills. They are all in work. Our legislative council has all 236 of us that they are responsible for drafting our bills. And so sometimes it is a little bit slow coming, but we do have an actual plan for these bills. So just be on the lookout. And I'm sure the next time we talk, I will have bill numbers and I can tell you exactly what has happened with them. Um, so that's the other kind of stuff. We want to hold all Georgia agencies accountable by making sure they follow the law, play by the rules. We are, and you will hear us talking over and over again about transparency and accountability. So that is a little bit of our mantra this year: transparency and accountability. Whether that's in campaign finance law, whether that is at agencies reporting and auditing, whether that is the rules that we're adopting for even how we behave and operate as a Senate. From the very beginning of this session, we have been talking about transparency so that you, Georgia citizens, understand what is happening, why it's happening, and you are very clear on the work that is happening under the Gold Dome and inside of each of our state agencies, which we give, a lot of power to through the budget that we appropriate to them.
Those are wonderful. That is wonderful. The codifying rights. That is something that I think if all of us could go back in the time machine and codify reproductive freedom rights. I know that a lot of folks would have wanted to do that in states where they could, and certainly in Congress. So that's great. And it's also nice to, hopefully those can come up for a floor vote, Senator, and you can put some folks on the record into how they really feel about these equality issues. One voting thing that voting related issue that I meant to mention when we were talking about that is not voting directly, but independent redistricting commission legislation that has been introduced in the House to try to, as Senator Halpern was referring to, gerrymandering. Obviously, that's something that is an issue, and the district maps for Congress, where those lines are, the lines for the state Senate, the lines for the state House, those are all drawn by our state legislature, and the party in power holds the pen, and they are always going to draw the lines to favor their party. And that's not special to Republicans. Democrats did it when we held the pen. I gave a speech last year about how important it is for us to focus on good government, that getting rid of partisan gerrymandering is going to take the party in power putting down the sword, so to speak, and not wielding that power to turn it over to an independent redistricting commission. But all of us will be better off we will get better legislation. I submit we would get better candidates, because you would be electing folks that are chosen by the people, as opposed to elected officials choosing which people they want to vote for them to make their lives easier. It's not supposed to work that way. So that's a piece of legislation that I sponsored last year and will be sponsoring again, and pushing for us to continue to talk about this idea. It happens in other states. There's no reason that it can't happen here. So I've been trying to look at the chat. I know we've pulled out some of the questions that have come up so far. Senator Halpern, if you have any other bills you want to talk about, go ahead. But then I thought if you're ready, we could jump in to make sure we're getting all these questions.
Yeah, I will. I think we should get into the questions. I will tell you that I am working on a bill that kind of sits in the space of tenant rights, kind of protecting people who rent. I am looking at not allowing our hotels to charge hourly rates. This kind of goes back to the issue of human trafficking more than anything, and also prostitution, pimping and prostitution. But I'm looking at a bill that would not allow hotels to charge an hourly rate. Uh, for it's okay if they charge you after you've stayed a night if you want late checkout by the hour, because some hotels do that, but just not allowing an hourly charge. So I'm looking at that. And of course, there's a bill that I've started to work on, and I'm actually vetting it and working it through different organizations around, landlords and some of the things that they must have in place for the protection of their tenants. So I just want you to know that there's been a lot in the AJC about how Georgia has some of the weakest laws protecting tenants. This won't cover all of the different aspects. And especially, we have very weak laws around eviction. Like, people can get evicted for nearly any reason, and there's not much protection around them for that. This bill won't deal with that. Some of these issues really, truly, once you start to delve into them, the things that seem like the most common sense end up being so much more complicated. And I think sometimes it's built that way. So my job is to try to unravel that and simplify it so that we can get the protections that we need. So I'm working on figuring out an angle to do that. And that's it. I mean, I've got, like I said, the no-knock warrant bill, tenant right bills. I've got some other public safety bills that we've already discussed. There will be a few other things as well, but those are the big ones that I wanted to kind of mention tonight.
Excellent. I'm going to start from the questions I see at the bottom, and then Kennedy, you will let us know if we miss any questions. And obviously we can also open it up for folks to ask on the meeting, but it's probably easier and more efficient if you've got a question, if you'll just type it in the chat, and then we can read it off, and we don't have to worry about muting and unmuting folks. Someone asked about the Okefenokee swamp issue, and there was a bill dropped in the House to address this issue, House Bill 781. It's a Republican sponsored bill. The lead sponsor is Darlene Taylor from down in Southwest Georgia. The bill would prohibit the state from granting mining permits along the Okefenokee swamp. So this is a bill to protect our environment, protect the wildlife down there. It's the right thing to do. The bill doesn't, because I think it would be unconstitutional to do so. It doesn't stop applications that are already in progress before the bill goes into effect, if it does, but it would prohibit future applications. And hopefully what this bill will also, the message that the bill will also send to our regulators is that we want these near the Okefenokee swamp. But that's what's going on with that, and it's a good group of sponsors, and so I would expect that bill to do well. So hopefully it will. Looking through these questions, someone asked about Is there any talk of a bill to repeal stand your ground laws? I haven't heard of anything in the House. Senator Halpern, is anything going on in the Senate?
No, not at all that I know of. Mm-mm.
It would be good. There's been talk of it before. It's never manifested into much, but
Mm-mm.
we've made some great strides in Georgia. Unfortunately, almost always in the response of great tragedy. But we now have a hate crimes law. We repealed citizens arrest. Say hello to Dexter, everyone, if you can hear my dog barking. So repealing stand your ground would be a great next step. So hopefully we will get some momentum behind that issue, but the update is just no, right now there's not. Kennedy, what am I missing? I feel like I probably am missing some questions in the
Yeah,
chat.
we got a few. I have a question here. Are there any activity to protect librarians from book bans or censorship wars throughout Georgia?
So in the Senate, I would say no, but this is something that I am keeping my ears to the ground on. Typically, when we see activity in other states, we do generally have the same things happen in Georgia. And I think just recently, the other day, I was looking at Florida's list of books that they were banning, and there was even a Rosa Parks book that was on that list. So I don't think that this is happening at this point in the session. I will tell you, last year I was very concerned about this because we had a whole slate of bills that we were hearing in the Education and Youth Committee that really were around, I'm going to say, parents' rights, right? And if parents are concerned about certain books, shouldn't they have the right to make sure that those books are not in their school that their children are attending? But so far this session, I'm not hearing anything about book bans. It's early. We don't have that many bills yet dropped in the Senate. Um, so hopefully we can stave that away. But I'm going to say that chances are this is something that we are going to have to deal with, maybe more a matter of time. I don't know when, but it might be just a matter of time before these are the very same arguments that we're having and conversations that we're having and pushback that we're really having to make and develop really concerted kind of campaign as to why this would be bad for Georgia, bad for Georgia's citizens, and bad for Georgia's students. I imagine, I mean, when you say protect librarians here, I immediately think of our schools. You might mean just more broadly, but I mean, I do think that this is an area that we've got to be vigilant about as it relates to schools and book bans in our schools. What do you think, Representative Evans?
Yeah, it's definitely something to keep an eye out on. And I saw someone wrote in the chat that there's censorship going on at in schools down in Southwest Georgia. And shout out to our Southwest Georgia friends who are joining us on the call. We represent Atlanta in Fulton County, but I tell a lot of folks who don't feel like their representative speaks for them that I'll always be here for you. And I know Senator Halpern feels the same way. So we're glad that you're tuning in. But no, I haven't anything specific on this issue in the House yet, but it may also be just a matter of time, because while it's not an election year like it was last year when I felt like we were just getting all of the red meat legislation, doesn't seem to be a high priority for folks this year, but it could only be a matter of time, or it may be things that people push toward the end of session with the hopes of passing them next year in an election year. So we'll keep our ear to the ground on that.
That's great. Yeah, I'm in Florida and that's definitely running rampant down here. But we have another question. Let's see. Can you give an update on the Department of Transportation's proposed changes to the Monroe Drive exit ramp off the Buford Highway connector?
Yes, I actually had a conversation recently with GDOT about that, and a lot of you will remember that there was construction to build a roundabout that was a little bit further near the underpass, and that one it was completed and seems to be working well for folks. I know there were some requests for some additional signage, which I'm told is coming. But then they're also going to put in a roundabout right across from the fire station on Monroe there when you get off the exit. And it's a little bit further away than I think we all once thought. They're still going through, they still got a couple more phases before they start actually turning dirt and drilling and actually causing the delays that will be coming. So we're definitely at least a year and a half away from that project actually being undertaken. And I know a lot of neighbors were concerned because they were hearing that this was going to be closed and you were going to be having permanent detours for at least 8 months, which is a long time, too much. And I also was advocating for our neighborhoods here, Piedmont Heights, Morningside, Linridge, Martin Manor in particular. We've been through a lot because of that roundabout construction, the Cheshire Bridge problem, and then there's been a lot of private construction on Piedmont. So I said, we can only take so much in this neighborhood. Can you please give us a break? And they said, well, definitely it will be at least a year and a half before that starts going under construction. And they are going to come up with ways to not keep everything locked down for 8 months. They're going, I don't have that solution yet, but they're very well aware. And our 5th congressional district GDOT member, Stacy Key, knows that this is a constituent issue that we will not stand for 8 months of closure and detours. So we don't yet have a solution, but they are working toward it. So I think we'll have some more good news on that front really soon.
Great. I know we already discussed this a little bit, but I didn't know if either of you wanted to expand on it. What are you hearing now about the runoff elections and ranked choice voting for municipal elections? Anyone at all interested in primary reforms? I know we touched on that, but.
Yeah, the ranked choice voting for municipalities introduced in the House. I have heard, and I don't know what's being talked about in the Senate more than others, but in the House, there's actually a lot of interest, it seems, on both sides of the aisle in the 45% rule. That if you get 45%, then you win without a runoff. If nobody gets 45%, then you go to a runoff. That actually used to be the law in Georgia once upon a time. I'm not sure how many years ago when that was changed, but there is a lot of precedent for that. There are some other states that do that as well. So we'll see. I mean, as I said, I'm a fan of ranked choice voting, but really I'm a fan of runoff reform. We have too many runoffs and we spend way too much money on runoffs in Georgia, and we're very special and unique in that standpoint. And while sometimes being special and unique is good, I don't think this is a good one for us to continue to do it. It's very confusing, time consuming, and expensive.
That's right. And we're one of only 2 states really that have this, that have runoffs. So we are definitely in the minority. Many other states ahead of us have figured out how to run their elections and get it decided much more quickly than we have, no matter how many people are in the race. So I do think that there's an appetite to do something around runoffs. What that's going to be, we don't know yet, but I agree on the Senate side as well, that 45% threshold seems to be a number that people feel comfortable with.
That seems to be all the questions that I see in the chat, but anyone feel free to add.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, we still got a couple more minutes. While you're thinking, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat if you want. I want to ask you for, I want to make sure you are aware of 2 things. We talked about it in the newsletter, but also think of maybe folks that don't see the newsletter that might be interested in these things. Number 1 is every year the Women's Caucus, the Women's Legislative Caucus, every senator, every rep, we get to honor a woman in our district with a the name of the award just flew out of my head, but it's to honor someone a servant leadership award, someone who is serving the community, but not in an elected position, not a partisan role, but just someone that is out there doing the good work, the unsung heroes. And I have some folks in mind, but let me cast a net and take nominations. So if you know of a deserving woman in House District 57, Morningside, Piedmont Heights, Ainsley Park, Linridge Martin Manor, Sherwood Forest, Peachtree Hills, you can go online and see all the neighborhoods. Please let me know and tell me why this person should be nominated, and we want to make sure that we put forward a good woman in District 57. And then also the PAGE program is back at the State House for kids between 12 and 18 to come and see their state government at work. Each, I don't know how it's working in the Senate, but in the House, we're each limited to 5 for the year. So if you're interested, if you have a son or daughter, granddaughter, grandson, neighbor child that you want to nominate to come down and spend a day with me, please let Kennedy know that as well. We'll make sure that we put our contact information in the chat for you. But these slots will fill fast. So please let us know some kids that want to come down and see their government at work.
And all those neighborhoods that Representative Evans just mentioned overlap into my Senate district. The news for me on the PAGE program is I get up to 20 pages that I can have over the course of the session. So I will put my information as well. And that between the two of us, we can accommodate a lot more people. It's a great experience for our young folks to come down and just be able to participate in government. So please, if you know anybody 12 to 18, definitely let us know their names if they'd be interested. We'd love to see them down there. And we will make sure that they learn a lot shadowing each of us as well. I am going to put in my information as well. Now I'm going to tell you all that I think I started by saying that literally today I moved offices. I don't know my new office phone number, so I can't put that in there, but I'm going to give you all a cell number, and I am going to, and I'm going to put my office number in, because if you find yourself down at the Capitol, please, please, please come and see me.
Absolutely. Well, I don't see any more questions, Kennedy, but y'all, this is, we're glad to be able to have this platform for us to all be together, but our phones our emails are open if you think of questions. I know I speak for Senator Halpern as well when I say, let us know, don't suffer in silence, don't keep all your good ideas to yourself, let us know. And I said it once, I'll say it again, please don't assume that we know what you know. If you see legislation moving that needs to be stopped, that needs to be supported, don't worry if you think we already know, we might not. So better safe than sorry. Please make sure that you reach out, share your expertise, because we're all in this together.
Absolutely. And so we will be on the lookout. We'll send a date around for our next town hall. It will be a crossover one. So as we mentioned, it'll be after March 6th. And then in the meantime, please don't be a stranger. Let us answer any questions you have. Let us know what's on your mind. Come and see us. I've also got a newsletter that I will be sending. I have been a little slow on mine this session, but sign up. Let me know. I want to hear from you. I think one of the things that you can realize about both myself and Representative Evans is we both really believe in being accessible, accountable. We love to share information. And so please don't hesitate to let me know how I can ever be of service to you, or if there's anything that I can help you with in terms of just you being a constituent or information flow. So thank you for joining us and staying the entire time